yeah, definitely go check out the Mongo booth. Even if you aren't a big fan of Mongo, Jeremy, who works there, is pretty cool. So go say hello. He bought me a beer to say that for him. Yeah, so I'm here to talk to you about APIs today. Sorry. Yeah, it's very true. So really quick thing about me, I'm from Bristol, so I have a funny accent. If you don't understand what I'm saying, wave some hands and I'll say it in a more British way, so it makes more sense. Strange accent. Live in New York now, so eventually it might tone down. You might know me from working on things like PyroCMS and CodeIgniter and other PHP-related stuff. But now I work for a company called Ride. Ride's a carpooling app, and we have an API, which is what I've been working on. I'm now the head of API. I got promoted last week. No more money, lots more responsibilities. Perfect. No, we actually have their old CTO, which is fun, but it's more about carpooling. It's like, you live together, you go to work in the same area, you should share a ride. So no paid drivers. Yeah, and definitely check it out. We launched like 3 weeks ago, so it's worth playing with. And the API is awesome. So I used to work for this company called Capture, and again, I was building their API. I was their CTO and only developer, which is not really what CTO is meant to mean. But I came across this one day, and it's a really blurry photograph, so I was so excited whilst buying a coffee that I didn't quite take the time to focus. But that's Chuck Norris kicking a polar bear in the Texan desert. Really excited about that. But yeah, Capture was some other check-in based location app, and while I was building their APIs, I ended up flipping quite a lot of tables because it was the first API I had built that could be considered a non-trivial API. So a lot of these things, a lot of APIs are just like, here's some data and then here's some JSON back, and it's really quite simple. And the reason that I had a bit of a hard time trying to learn how to make these APIs in the first place is because when I started working with PHP, it was like that. Most websites were just this. You've got some data store and you've got some like post-nuke CMS. Anyone use post-nuke? No, PHP nuke, Mambo, any of that? Yeah, that sort of stuff. There's like 10 forks and they're all just as bad as each other. And you shove it on some crappy little GoDaddy. Yeah, back in the day. You shove it on some like VPS and then done, it's fine. Everything runs from this one system. And now this is like half of what some systems look like. You've got like a bit of Postgres and you've got your API in the middle that talks to the database with some Redis caching. And you've got like a Angular, JS or Ember dashboard somewhere, which is also talking to the API. You've got like various different services, Twitter, Facebook, all that junk. And yeah, it gets pretty complicated. You've got some of it on Heroku maybe or Amazon. And you've got these other hosted queue systems and the whole internet. And it gets a little bit complicated going from kind of that to that. This is what Ride looked like a few months ago. We've got like a bunch of different cron jobs. We've got the API. We've got various different workers and different services. It's a service-oriented architecture, and they're all talking to the API in the middle. So getting things stable for that is quite a chore. I'm pretty much only talking about REST stuff here, but REST has been misused so much by so many people since 2006 that it doesn't really mean anything anymore. REST generally is the idea that your API should be evolvable and you should make good use of whatever standard you're working in. So if you're using HTTP, then you should make use of the words are hard. Can I quit? So I'm very sick at the moment, so I'm struggling up here. It's the idea of you should take advantage of the uniform and the specification. So instead of with SOAP, you do a lot of, it's very RPC based, and you have like get and post handles everything, regardless of whether it's a delete, stuff like that. So taking advantage of the HTTP spec is more what we're talking about here, as opposed to which approach is the best. The first thing to working on any application, but specifically, well, definitely with an API, is you want to seed your database with data to work with. What a lot of people do is they open up their favorite MySQL client and just dump in like 5 records and then check that those 5 records work in their database. That's all well and good, apart from the fact that you won't have 5 records when you go live. With Capture, the freelance developer who did most of the work before I got there, tested the entire system with an iPhone that was plugged into his computer, built the iPhone app and the API with 5 records in it working over Wi-Fi. Funnily enough, it worked perfectly. The second it went anywhere near the real world, the whole thing fell over. The other way people try and avoid making manual data is they just download their production data, which is kind of a smart idea, but you have to make sure you sanitize that data so you don't have real telephone numbers, real email addresses, real credit card details sitting around on your laptop that you might leave at a bar. Another problem with it is if your sanitization fails for whatever reason, then you might end up sending out an email to 20,000 clients who were invested through a financial services piece of software, and the email, it's all right, I can wait. I was working at this financial services company, and this person sent out an email blast to about 20,000 people, and the email address was from Phil M. Cock or something really offensive. And they all had like upwards of £100,000 invested in our company, so all of those clients left. Funnily enough, he was fired. Using database seeding is incredibly important if you want to keep your job and have an app that actually works. So do that. There are lots of tools that can help you with this. If you're a PHP developer, Factory Muffin is great. If you're a Ruby or Python or anything else developer, there's probably something called Faker, which is the same thing. So the first step of like actual API-related decisions is, what do you name stuff, right? Your API is going to have endpoints, and you need to work out what those endpoints are going to be. I like this picture because it kind of is one of the reasons I might never have a child, because I'll never work out what to call it. It took a long time. It was like a week of me starting to play World of Warcraft till I worked out a name for that character. I just can't do that stuff. This is what a lot of people start trying to do, because as developers, we're fairly used to the idea of writing a model with functions in it, right? Get by ID, and then get users by ID and then get users, for example. So you have like a singular and a plural, which should do different things. But the problem with this is that not all the words in the English language pluralize perfectly. This is a bit of a pain in the backside, especially if you have people that don't speak English as a first language, which my company does. There are some even worse words like this, which is an example I came up with. So trying to have single and plural endpoints is just asking for trouble. So just do this. It's just so much easier. Then you can nest your responses. You can nest your endpoints. So at the top, we've got a collection of places. Then we have a resource, which is the one place we're talking about. Then we have a sub-collection, which is a collection of check-ins inside the place that we're talking about. And then you can go, like, this is a few 2 levels deep. This is a bit Inception. Because if this is a unique ID, then you don't need to do that. That first bit's irrelevant. You can just do check-ins 34. But if this isn't unique and it's kind of related to the sub-resource, it sometimes makes sense to do it. Who here has used CodeIgniter in the past? Who used the CodeIgniter REST server that I'm sorry I made? Right. So the CodeIgniter REST server. It was an extension that continued the CodeIgniter URL practice of SEO-optimized URLs, right? So we always had URI parameters, and the get string didn't used to work in CodeIgniter. It just flat out didn't work. It would just nuke the query string. So we always had this kind of approach of doing things. And that translated through to people building APIs. They are building RESTful APIs that were SEO optimized, which is the most futile task in the world. Even if you do it successfully, no one cares. So don't do that, just use the query string, right? Slashes mean this is a folder, this is a sub-collection, this is a sub-resource, this is something inside the other thing. So if it's just parameters, then just use parameters. Another little horror story from some of my friends and from a lot of other people who uses auto-incrementing IDs to output their data. This is almost as much of a problem for any website in the world as it is APIs, but it's even more of a problem for us. So some friends of mine were working on a startup. It was a startup accelerator. They got like £10,000 and put most of their time and effort into building a fairly simple API, a fairly simple iPhone app, and then spent the rest of the money generating this awesome data set. Their application was Art Spotter, which was, the idea was kind of walk around and you're like, oh, that's some pretty cool art that I didn't know was there. I'm going to check that art in on Foursquare, essentially, and you put a pin on a map so that other graffiti lovers and art lovers can go and find this cool random installation and check out the art. That was great until someone else came along and went, that's an awesome data set. I'm going to save that and then build a better application with my larger budget. And the way they did that was just they went through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, saved the whole thing. So they spent months working on this really unique data set, and then someone went, cool, save. Now they're bankrupt. So a lot of the times people do this because a lot of people just, the second you start working on a schema, you're like, right, this is the check-ins table. What's the first thing I need? Auto-incrementing ID, obviously, number 1. Why? Why do you need that? Who told you needed that? Everyone does this, and it's just a really old-fashioned habit. One thing you can do, a lot of ORMs force you to do that. So if you are stuck with auto-incrementing IDs, you can have them internally, but you can have something else externally. So my friend Zach here made a little thing called Tiny, and this is a PHP example. These things all exist in other languages. Actually, how many PHP devs do we have compared to other languages? Okay, I'll ignore the rest of you. So this is meant to be like a generic talk, but it has some PHP examples. you can use this. This is basically a secret key. So just like mash to keyboard, apply face to keyboard, and roll, just anything. And then you put in the number 5, and it comes out as E. That's a little bit rubbish when it's the number 5, but you can kind of pad your ID. So the bigger the number, the longer the string gets, and it's very unguessable unless you know this secret key. So you can output E as your ID, and then you can accept E in the URL, and it will come back as 5. So you can translate.
Oh, so there's no table, what do you call it? Table. There's no table in between to match that.
No, you don't need that. It just works it out. The algorithm.
Based on that.
Yes, it's more obfuscation than encryption, because you could probably work it out with enough ID numbers, but it would take someone a lot of time as opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So that's one way of doing it. Works pretty well. The longer the key, the better. The longer ID, the better. That's that one, this slide. So yeah, the better approach is to use a UUID. Wonderful chap called Ben Ramsey made this bizarre render name that I don't really know how to pronounce, let alone remember how to spell. But it's called UUID, and in other languages, they're just called UUID. But it's a universally unique identifier. And there's a few different ways of doing it, 1, 2, 3, 4, I forget what they mean. But you have this, which is not only going to be unique on your system, but across like other websites as well, which is pretty cool. Another benefit of this, which I only found out about the other day thanks to MWOP off of Zen Framework, if you're using UUIDs, then you can do offline syncing really easily. So if you don't have any internet, then people can create resources and then save them locally with that ID, and you can carry on like they're saved because it's already got an ID, right? Then once you sync it back, you can just slot them all into place, and they're never going to overlap because they're universally unique, right? So
merge databases really easily.
Yes, that too.
Don't have to worry about conflicting IDs.
That's handy. This is the dear, I am dying up here. This is the least interesting slide of the lot, but it's basically a quick overview of how these things work. So if you want to list your users, then do a get on users. If you want to read one, then get the one. If you want to update one, yay for microphones. If you want to update one, you can use a put. Now, put means that you know the entire response that you're sending. You know the entire item. So if it's a user profile, then you have all of their information, their probably not their password, but their email address and their bio and their username. All these things go into the response. Patch is another way of editing things. So there's 2 ways to edit. A lot of people get really stuck up on like this one method is this one CRUD action, and it's not really like that. So patch is another way to update things, and all you do with patch is you send the piece of data you want to update. So if you're updating a user's profile, then you just send their email address, and it would just change their email. This is the most useful with statuses. So if you, for example, at Ride, we have matched riders. We can match you with various different people, and then you can say whether you accept or reject. That status, we can just change it from rejected. You don't have to update all of the rest of the data. Actually, there's one thing called the HTTP Patch Rfc, which has been worked on by Mark Nottingham, I think, which is a fairly complicated thing. But the idea is you send like a JSON array of actions that you want to take, and they're all atomic. So you say increment this field by 1, decrement this field by 1, replace this value with this value, and it just runs through them in order and does them atomically. The other approach is that you just send the field status. You send like a JSON object, and you just send the one field you want to do. Either one. So post is not always just for creating. Post is for kind of adding something to the database that you can add multiple of, theoretically. So if you want to insert a new user, because you don't know the user's ID already, you just post it to the collection, and it will add it to the collection. Delete is delete, funnily enough. So another useful thing for put is uploading images. Wow. So yeah, image put. This is useful for like an avatar or a cover photo for a venue or anything like that, where basically you just say, I'm talking about this user. This is the sub resource, the image, and this is useful if they only have one image. And you can use put, which some people think is edit only. Put is, I know the entire URL, and I'm going to give you the entire body of data, and I can do this as many times as I want. So if the image corrupts, then you just retry that request, and you can just keep on retrying that request until it works. If you want to add a new image, then you just keep on putting things up. And that's a perfectly good way of doing it. The data you actually send can be I quite often do 2 approaches at the same time. You can send the actual image PNG, image JPEG as the content type and just directly upload that image. Some people like to base64 encode that data. But you just literally say HTTP body is the image and shove that up. And the other approach is to say application/JSON and then send the URL. So you can have like a worker go and download that image on the side. I find I have to do both because web clients, the actual website, they don't really have any way to upload that image to you. They can like send you a URL, or they have to do multi-part form rubbish. So they quite often like to download. With the web clients, they quite often like to connect to your Facebook account, find that URL, and pass the URL to the API. Whereas the iPhone user has the photo library of actual images, so they like to say, here's the image, just upload that. So both helps. So that if you have more than one image, if they're going to have multiple images, if this is like an album or this is whatever, multiple things, then you can treat images as a collection instead of a resource, and you can post to them. So just like any other collection. And then that's just another collection, which is copy and paste errored. Lovely. So now that we're done with that fairly dry slide, this is onto a fun horror story of someone getting things wrong with their API. This chap, Jamie Hannaford's a friend of mine. He worked for Rackspace, and Google started deleting all of their crap randomly. They had an XML API, and somehow it got onto their API and just started auto-discovering and crawling their API. They had a destructive delete action on a GET request. So it would just go, oh, I wonder what's on this page. Oh, nothing, that's strange. Oh, what's on this page? Oh, nothing, that's strange. And meanwhile, their servers are going like freaking out, like, oh, stuff's being deleted, what's going on? So yeah, don't do that. I had to liven it up after that fairly boring slide beforehand. Picking the format is pretty useful. If you get the wrong format, people can't work with your stuff. There's a lot to choose from. I completely avoid XML unless I have to like interface with a government database. But a lot of people, especially PHP developers, they start off doing stuff like this. And I know that you can't really read this, it's not very important, but this is the general format. You recognize it? The application X form encoded stuff. And what this is, when you send a post request through the browser, in the background it's doing one of these requests. And it sends all your data like that. Everything's a string, arrays are square brackets, it's a mess, there's no booleans, there's no integers, it's all just a bloody string. But no one really cares about that when they're working with a browser. If you're building like an admin dashboard or whatever crud you're usually working on, then you just like make a form and then you get it out of the post variable and your job's done. But when you start working with an API, you start to notice the actual format of this, and it gets really gross. Like that's just, we've got it in check-in because it's inside an array, and then we've got check-in message, this whole bit of text. Check-in with friends. Everything from here to here is just saying I'm with my friend 1, 2, 3, 4, right? It's like 3 lines of just the same crap over and over again. So the next step people try and make is, oh, I heard JSON's pretty cool, but I don't know how to access that JSON, so I'll put it in a form payload and then escape all the stuff because otherwise it breaks the syntax, and then I've got JSON. And this is really stupid. The company Zen Coding used to do this, and then I made fun of them on the internet, and they apologized and changed it. That was pretty cool. I was like, oh, people listen to my shit. But but you don't need to do that. If you want to send JSON, then you can just send JSON. It's pretty much exactly the same, only this is actually JSON and it's not disgusting. So just do that. And like I said, the reason people get confused is that they don't know how to access it, and it's really easy. So the normal way that you access stuff is post foo. If you've got a fancy framework like Laravel, then you can do input JSON foo, static code. Then if you want to do it yourself, kind of natively in PHP, then all you've got to do is JSON decode, file get contents, PHP input. Now this is a bit of a weird thing. It's a stream. So you can read that stream. Everything before PHP 5.6, the second you would try and read that stream, it would completely empty itself. So it would dump itself into memory and then be gone. So if you tried to access that thing twice in 2 bits of code, or you didn't cache the result, it would vanish. Yes? Sorry?
That's murdered my code before.
Yeah, it sucks, right? Like, cool, I'm going to get this data. Yeah, look, I've got this data. Where'd it go? So yeah, don't do that. If you're using less than 5.6, then either upgrade already or... Yeah. Yeah, it's really annoying. But it's fine in 5.6 now, so just upgrade. Error messages are fun. Sorry for anyone that hasn't got their glasses with them. Error messages are really hard, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong. If you say 200 okay and it's not okay, then I've got a serious problem with you. I have no problem offering you a headbutt if you do this, because there have been multiple times in the past where I've made a request with an API and it said it's fine, and then it hasn't saved that result. People put validation messages into the response under a 200 okay because they treat errors like a really extreme, terrible thing just happened. Like, I don't know, a dinosaur ate the server. Like, they think that it's a really important thing. But validation errors are errors too. Anything that means that what I think happened didn't happen is an error, and I need to be told about that. So yeah, validation errors are errors. Do the same thing. But the flip side of that is just because something is not a 200 doesn't mean that it didn't work, right? Anyone come across this code before? 201, 202, they're all good things. This is really popular in jQuery land. They used to do this stuff all the time, and luckily they separated it into success and errors now, so people don't do that. 200 is all about success, so anything, there's 201, 202, might be a 203. 300 is redirection, which can also be a success. So YouTube API does this. When you upload, when you make a request to upload a file, there are two requests. The first request is that you say, here's all the metadata, and throw that up there. Then they respond with a 302 and a location tag saying, this is where you should put your video. So then you can make a post, put some sort of request to the location URL they give you, and then that's perfectly acceptable. So a 300 might be okay. 400 means you shouldn't do that. You did a bad job. Try again harder. 500 is, I'm sorry, that was my fault. I don't know what happened there. There's all sorts of different errors, and people try and use all of the errors like they unlock some sort of Foursquare achievement badge for getting them, or like it's Harry Potter and they just learned a new spell. Like, it doesn't, you don't need to use all of them. These are the ones I used at Capture, and they got us by perfectly. 201 is all okay. 201 is created something okay. Semantic just difference there. 202 means, yep, I've got that. I'll get back to you some point in the future. I'm working on it, buddy. 400, questionably, is used by validation. I say questionably because you know how developers love to talk about tabs versus spaces. There's a big fight between 400 and 422 for validation. 422 isn't officially part of the web spec, but Twitter used it for a while, so I guess it's a thing now. And 400 means it's a bad request, but your syntax is bad. So if that's an XML file, it could be that your XML is syntactically not escaped properly, or it could mean, you know, there's random trailing characters in there. But bad request to some people also means that email address isn't in a valid format, right? So you can use 400 for that. I don't honestly care, but have a look at the two. 401, it means I have no idea who you are. 403 means I know who you are, but get out. 404 is I haven't got a clue what you're talking about. There's no one here. 405 means you're hitting the right URL, but you can't do that. So you can't delete. You can get, but you can't delete. Your framework will probably handle this for you. I sent a pull request a while ago to Laravel, so that if you have things mapped on various different things, then it will error correctly. 410 is something I actually don't use anymore, mostly because I can't be bothered. But what 410 is for is it's semantically different from 404. 404, if you hit, actually a little caveat about 404. If you hit a collection and there's no data in there, that's not a 404 because that collection exists, it's just empty. So you shouldn't 404 an empty collection, just show an empty array, right? People say, oh, that's extra data. I'm like, it's 10 bits, shut up. But if you hit a sub-resource and that sub-resource isn't there, then that's a 404 because that URL doesn't exist, right? So 410, that means it used to be valid data, but it's been deleted. Now, this is a bit of a hard thing to implement because it means you have to keep around a history of what has ever existed forever. But the one way I have done this in the past is I maintain a Redis list of deleted items. So you can just say, if this is in the deleted list of items, then show a 410, otherwise show a 404. And then you cap it to 10,000 things, and you push them off the end. And it doesn't grow that big, and after 6 months' time, it will be a 404, but who honestly cares at that point? Whether you care about any of that, even a little bit, I don't know. But 500 is like some random error. Yes?
Do you ever use status code 412?
No. What's that one? Oh, yeah, I can't remember what that one's for. No, I haven't. There's loads of them, and you can't use them all. It's
There's a few April Fool's ones in there as well.
Yeah, you're really good at guessing my next slide because this. That's why you can't use them all. You can't use all of them because some of them are fucking ridiculous. So anyway, so speaking about errors, people always try. The other reason people try and use all of the errors is because they believe that there will be one error to match every single scenario that API is ever going to have. They don't need to worry about sending back their own error messages because the 429 or whatever. No, it doesn't work. You need to supplement your status code. The status code is a category of error that lets the client know what sort of problems happened. And then you need to be very specific. YouTube, bless them, really tried and got nowhere close. Another argument people have is, should you have errors or error? They couldn't decide, so they just went with both. Thanks. But not really the point. I'm not too concerned about that. I'm concerned about what does that error, anyone want to take a guess at what they think that error means? So got YouTube parameter, so I guess I'm missing a parameter. Yep, missing required parameter, that's a good sign. No filter selected, right? You've got an error message like this. So you would think, I need to put a parameter called filter in there, right? That seems like a logical choice. No, I was missing that. So it took me about 2 hours of Googling to find on the 5th page a Stack Overflow answer that said, the documentation's right here, just do that. And then I clicked on the link and it didn't exist anymore. The documentation was deleted and it was only 3-month-old Stack Overflow post. So YouTube really annoyed me that day. But that doesn't make any sense at all. So what I like is when people are really specific about their error, right? Looking at this as a human being, I know exactly what's happened. There was a problem with my OAuths and I know that my session has expired because the time is out of date. It's kind of annoying, yeah, it's kind of annoying it's in Unix time because I'm not a computer and I don't care about 1970, but
No, I just like, amen. I'm like, I am so tired of crappy error messages.
Right, but do you know what the problem with this one is? Do you know what the problem with this one is? No status code. Right, there's a HTTP status code, which is just assumed in there somewhere. But there's no actual code in their message. So as a human being, I know exactly what's happening. As a computer, I haven't got a clue. I've written code in the past that goes through, and it's like a Python worker code that tries to pull down information from their Facebook account. Sometimes you get Auth Exception, and it could mean the access tokens you've got are for a page and not a user, and therefore you can't do this action. So no matter how many times you try again, it won't work. And sometimes it means you should try again. So I've written code that does like index substring matching to work out what I should do. And it's got this massive switch of gross, like if this string's in there, and if they change the error message, then my whole app's broken. So all you got to do is throw in that. And if I see a 210, I know exactly what a 210 is. Mostly because I'd have probably Googled their website and found out the Facebook error code 210. That's not a HTTP code. What would be even more useful to save me Googling is that, right? Send me a link. Thanks. Here's a problem. It's of OAuth descent. It's an error 210, and you can get it from over here. That's just really helpful. Don't try and work out errors yourself. I tried a lot of the time to do it myself. Everyone else tries. Everyone's got this unique snowflake error format, and it's a pain in the backside. JSON API. Do you want to know what JSON API is? No? Okay, well first check out JSON API. I used to hate JSON API for a long time, and then they changed everything, and I liked it a bit, and then they changed everything, and I liked it a bit less, and they're going to change it again in like a week, and then I'll see how I feel. It's not quite finished yet, but it's getting there. Even if you don't like the whole API, or the whole format, then the errors is really good. It's like a really simple error format, which is the style that I used for some examples earlier, and a much more in-depth, absolutely over-the-top nerd-engineered solution from Mark Nottingham is the HTTP problem. If you just search HTTP problem, you'll find it. Speaking of, don't try and reinvent the wheel when it comes to really simple things like authentication. Errors are a solved problem. Authentication is a solved problem. This is how someone tried to solve their how do we authenticate users problem by having this like, it's already in a subfolder, which is weird. Use a subdomain, you jerk. But there's the endpoint over there. Then there's a username, and then there's a password, and then there's arguments that are URL slashed. So he's got they have their passwords in plain text stored in the Apache logs, which is good for their users. They have SEO optimized URL strings. So theoretically, if someone does come across this URL, then Google will plaster it all over the internet. It's just a really terrible idea when you could just use OAuth. Anyone looked at Oauth and thought it's a bit complicated? Oh, this is a safe space. Yeah, it's really complicated. It's really hard to implement. Aaron Hammer had a big old moan about Oauth 2. He was the person that was very instrumental in making OAuth 1 and helped out with 2. And a lot of people really complain about OAuth 2 because it's hard to implement. Okay, use a pre-existing solution. There's one. My friends made it. It's really good. They were paid like $50,000 by the University of Lincoln to make this solution, and then we got it for free. So that's cool. Use existing solutions. If you're on Rails or Ruby, then there's Doorkeeper. There's loads of things out there. But so Aaron's complaints were, number 1, hard to implement. Implement a solution already. Number 2, it's insecure if you don't use SSL. Okay, use SSL. That's fine. Number 3, other companies have implemented it badly. Okay, if I speak English badly, that doesn't mean that English is a bad language, although it is complicated and annoying, and I do speak it badly. OAuth 2 is really flexible, and you can do loads with it. This is a crazy example of me doing something awesome, and what this is a social login via OAuth. So if someone wants to, I'm a Capture user. Capture is the company I used to work for, and I've got an iPhone app, and I want to log in via Facebook to this app. The interface doesn't know whether you're registering or signing up or signing in. It doesn't matter, right? There's one magical connect me with Facebook button that can be installed on the web and the iPhone and the Android. All it does is it makes this request in the background. Client ID and client secret are the Capture iPhone app client ID and client secret. So that lets us know that it's the iPhone app. Then you have the access token, which is their Facebook access token, and that came from the Facebook iPhone SDK, right? Then you have the grant type, social. You have to tell it what grant type you're using. And then the network is Facebook, and that's all we need. In the background, that runs off to Facebook and says, right, I've got this access token. Give me some information about it. Is it valid? Does this connect to a user? If so, who is this user? You get back Facebook UID 7 or whatever. So I can then look in my database and say, do I have any knowledge of a user connected to a Facebook account called with the UID of 7? If I do, then I can log them in and I respond with access tokens for that user. If I don't have any record of that user in the database, I can do a request to the Facebook Graph API, hit the me endpoint, get all their data back, shove that user into the database, and then say, okay, now here's the user ID, give them access tokens for that user, right? Does that make sense? It's really powerful. You can do anything you want. You could use a grant type that says grant type facial recognition, and they have to send you a photograph with a timestamp from the last 30 seconds, and it recognizes your face. You can do anything you want with this thing. It's awesome. I actually really want to make that now. I just thought of that. That's quite cool. Yeah, as I said earlier, use SSL. I first gave this talk in South Africa. I've kept it in there just so I can humble brag about South Africa. But it only costs a couple of $100, and it's really cheap to get SSL now. Also, Mozilla are working on like free SSL certificates or something. So is that out yet?
Not yet.
Every cert or something? I can't remember. But SSL is perfect apart from when you're speaking at a conference in South Africa and then I was on stage when Heartbleed happened, and someone went, on that last slide, I was like, use SSL. And they're like, yeah, but what about Heartbleed? And I went, what's Heartbleed? And they went, well, everyone on the internet, their website's getting hacked. It's like, that sounds awful. I was like, mashed through my slides and ran off so I could go and fix the company. Luckily, no one cared about our website at all, not even the users, let alone hackers. But the thing that I would generally say, without trying to sound too condescending, is that unless you work for a bank, you're probably not the first target when one of these things come out, right? So for me, my concern with Capture, if the entire internet, or like a good half of the internet, is open to being hacked, people aren't going to mess about with some service that helps you get a free cup of coffee if you take a photograph of your meal, right? Like I was never, that's never the attack there. So whilst what you're working on may well be very important, that banks are probably going to be hacked first. So these things usually aren't a huge problem. Refresh tokens, who knows what they are? Okay, who has used Facebook tokens and had successes? We got there in the end. They're pretty hard, but they are useful. The idea of a refresh token, in the same way that pesky Windows Network IT administrator would come around and say, you should change your password, and you'd be like, shut up. The idea is that if you keep the same password for a long time, then the chances of it being compromised by being found somewhere, someone snooping on your computer, tracing messages over the network, whatever, could eventually be found out. Facebook don't use refresh tokens at all. Oh, sorry, I forgot to explain the bit. Yeah, so you need to change your password more often, and Oauth tokens are essentially the same thing. An Oauth token will last for a certain amount of time, then it will expire, and you have to get a new access token with the refresh token. So you make the access token somewhere really available, like it can be in the browser, it can be in a session, whatever, questionable. But if they're short-lived, it doesn't matter. And then the refresh token is hidden away somewhere on the server, and then you can go and request new access for them. Facebook don't do that, they never have, and it's really annoying. When your access token runs out, at some point between 30 and 60 days, depending on how much people have been using your app, it just stops working. And the only real approach is you have to send the user back to Facebook. So if they're coming to your website, you have to say, okay, log in. You can redirect them to Facebook, and then they come back, and that's okay. But if it's like a long-lived process, like watching information about your Facebook activity and doing various things, you just got to send them an email being like, hey, can you log into Facebook again? Because you just can't do anything about it. It's really annoying. If they use a Facebook SDK on your iPhone or whatever, then you get new tokens quite often, so that's okay. But servers just can't do it. YouTube are a bit better. YouTube are a bit better because they only do this half as bad. So I was told that I wasn't really allowed to swear, but I forgot to change my slides. Oh, it's okay. It's fine. They can do refresh tokens, but if you are developing with a YouTube API, the first time that you log in, the first time you authorize your account with YouTube, it will send you off to YouTube. You log in, you come back, and that response will have a refresh token in it. If you don't capture that refresh token the first time around, then you never get another one unless the user goes back to YouTube and disconnects their account and then reconnects their account. So whilst you develop with it, this is really annoying when I'm like, first request, awesome, I got a refresh token, this is working out really well. Second request, huh? Third request, fifth request, 2 hours later, what the fuck? So make sure you save it the first time because otherwise you don't get it back. That's annoying, but that shouldn't be a problem with your users, ever, right? New topic, away from Oauth. I put a little label on the top of this one because the first couple of times I gave this talk, I looked at it and went, I have no idea what this slide's about. Wizard of Oz, lovely. You never want people to have too much knowledge about your data layer, the way you store your data, what data's in there. There's going to be hidden fields you don't want to expose. And what a lot of people do, put your hands up if you're guilty of this. Who's done this in their API? All right, you're all much better API developers than anyone else I've seen. But a lot of frameworks make it very easy for people to say, here's all of the data and turn it into JSON now, please. Here's an array of stuff. Boom. When you've got, imagine Starbucks sign up to your check-in service and you've got 1 billion locations, you're going to return 1 billion locations from that endpoint. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is that you start to get formatting issues where floats are strings and booleans are one inside a string just because PHP data bindings aren't great. YouTube do like both. They actually type in some of their stuff as integers and then down there some of them are strings because who cares? No idea why. I built a tool called Fractal to help me get around this, which is basically a fancied up array map. And these transform are callbacks. You can put any data you want into the argument. Then that's like a ORM instance, and you return an array in the format that you want. So on the right, those are the fields in your database. On the left, those are the fields that show up in JSON, and you're all done. And this is pretty handy. This was a bug in Laravel where they changed it from returning a string to returning a carbon object. And then when you JSON encode that, it turned it into like a sub-object, and it broke the API. So now I can typecast it as a string and fix the API.
But they fixed that.
No, that was a feature, but it was introduced in 406, which is where you introduce breaking changes. December. So, check-ins. Another cool thing you can do with Fractal is you can include stuff. This is very similar to the JSON API. So you can include these other relationships. If you have an ORM, you can take that and dump them straight into like an eager load and then loop through. And Fractal will help you display those. Pagination is... Cursor-based pagination is really good for APIs if you have a lot of data. This is what Facebook do. The classic pagination approach is, I know that I have 100 things and we want 10 things per page, so we have 5 pages, you're on page 1, here's the next few pages. That's great apart from the fact that you are counting all of your data every time. You can think, all right, I'll cache that, and I know that I've got 100, that's awesome, but then you have filters involved that are like status active. Okay, you have to cache all of those. Well, all right, smartass, now you've got someone requesting things based on proximity to a latitude, longitude, you cannot cache that. So if you have 1 million places, you're going to have 1 million different cache hits, and it's going to be useless. So cursor-based is the idea that you have this like obscure cursor tag. This, it was what Facebook do, and it's base 64 encoded 15 or whatever. So you're just saying like, I want after 15, which means you'll get 16, 17. And then you can provide a next URL, which is places and cursor equals. That's the URL encoded, base64 encoded version of 15. Just pass an obscure cursor, take that cursor, pass it on, take that cursor, pass it on, until you get all the way to the end. On the very last page, it's still going to say, here's the next cursor, but you don't have any data yet. So you'll hit that page, and you'll get an empty collection, and you're fine, right? It's slightly less performant because you've got to make an extra request, but it's so much more performant because you're not counting your database all the time. Fractal will help you do that too. If you are paginating, make sure you put a limit, and if you are putting a limit, make sure you cap with a top and bottom. -1 is unlimited, and 1,000,000 is not going to be nice for your API. Testing is very important. Automating your testing, especially with an API, is wildly important. It's so important. If you don't automate your testing, it doesn't exist. You'll have someone fix some random bug over the weekend, not knowing that you dumped some crap code that didn't actually work into master because you were bored and it was Friday and you wanted to leave. And they'll just deploy your broken code, and then everyone's sad because it's the weekend. And I'm 40 miles out of the city on my bike, and I've got to cycle home as fast as I can. A lot of these theoretic examples are close to home. The testing that you automate, with an API, I often don't focus that hard on unit testing, which is a little bit of a guilty thing. With unit testing is usually like, does this model do this exact thing? Like, if I put in this value, do I get this response back? That's all well and good, and if you have, and you should. But if you can only do one type of testing, integration testing is more important. When I hit this URL, does it work at all? Does it return the errors I expect? It's basically unit testing, but on an API level. So if you have every single request that your client is going to make in an integration test, that really is step one. Does it work from the outside? And then you can get inside that code and be like, does all of my code work with values that I'm not even using theoretically, so that I can be more confident about adding new stuff, right? But you don't have to pick one or the other. Integration is really good. Unit testing is pretty good too. Try and do both if you can, is what I'm saying.
Unit testing is just going to help you get to the solution faster.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because you're going to know where exactly it's.
Yeah, it's just for like little bits here and there, but like if you're going to really do work on the one, then try and do the one that shows that the stuff your clients are doing actually works, right? I don't do this anymore because I've found some better tools in Rails, and I'm going to have to update this. But what I did for a while was use Behat with some custom stuff and say, when I request this, do I get the right response? Do I get these fields back? Does it work how I expect? This is really good for versioning as well, because I could have a version 3 set of tests in the version 3 code base. The version 4 code base would have an updated set of tests. So we renamed created app to created in the database, and we knew that both of our serializers were putting the fields out as the version was expecting. Check things don't work properly as well as they do work properly. So a lot of the time people will throw nope straight into their ORM. It will return a null instead of an object, and then they try and work with that object and they get a 500. So make sure these things fail elegantly. Random bugs start popping up. So instead of a Boolean, someone sends a string and it just completely exploded. I can't remember why, but if you find an error at a later point, putting a test to make sure that you don't get regressions. Documentation is wildly important. API Blueprint is something I've used, and it's really helpful. You can whack a markdown file in the root of your code base and hook it up to their API service, and it will make stuff that looks just like this. This is Aglio, which is another output format for that same markdown, and you can basically output automated documentation that contain all of your parameters, all of your body values, all of the methods, everything, document them well. You can then use continuous integration tool called Dread, which is just a command line tool that you run. It looks at your API documentation file, which is in a certain format, runs it against a local instance of your API, and every single example request that you make, it will make against your API and check that it gives the correct example response. So that can be really hard to set up. I've got a blog post on it, but it's a really good tool to make sure your documentation never falls out of sync, which it will do. And the last thing I've got to say is Get Postman is a really cool system for, it's like the API developers Photoshop, right? You want to be in this thing all the time, and you can make requests. You can make a collection, which you can then share with other people, and you can have all different requests like get, post, put, delete on them, different ones for each one, some that show success, some that show errors, and you can actually, there are tools to export and import both API and Postman, so you can send them both ways. So if you end up building the documentation first, which I recommend, Then once you've got the documentation written up and everyone agrees that's the format, dump that into Postman and start building against those endpoints, or do it the other way. Build it in Postman, and then once it's done, export that as documentation. But either way, that will help you build an API that you don't hate too much. And one final note is there's a pretty good book about APIs that you should all totally buy. And it's right there, and that'll give you some money off. So I have like 2 minutes for questions.
What are you looking at replacing VNet with?
So the last API I built was in Rails, and it uses action dispatch, which is essentially, for integration testing now, I think I'd probably doing it again in PHP, just use Guzzle and PHP unit, and then just have a group called integration, and write some helper methods that would be like just a little get function and a little post function, and just do it in PHP unit. It's just much better. Frisbee.js?
Yeah, Frisbee.js.
Okay, I'll check that out. I'll trade that. Oh, yeah, I've heard of that, actually. Didn't get to play. Oh, okay. I can't believe people would stand around here and try and hawk their shit on these people that are just trying to learn about APIs. How would you? Oh, it's not on the screen anymore. Oh, that didn't work. But yeah, anyone else?
Could you just discuss hypermedia for a minute?
Yes, so hypermedia is a thing I don't always try and push on people because hypermedia is what makes something a REST API. Without hypermedia, it's not even RESTful. It's just a HTTP thing, which, whatever. A lot of people get really, whatever, fight about semantics. But the idea of hypermedia is that you put in links to where other actions can be found. So on the very root page of your API, it should have a list to all the different collections that you have so people can go and interact with it. You should be able to crawl around the API and find stuff. You should be able to get to a venue or a place and then have a link to check in so that people don't need to know. Hypermedia is like a self-discovery thing, so people can find out pretty much everything that they can actually do with the API without looking at documentation. That leads to building more intelligent clients that can kind of just crawl through and evolve over time, because if you change a URL, then the link is going to change in the response, and it doesn't matter. The reason a lot of people don't use hypermedia is that it's slower. People these days aren't trying to build an API that lasts for 40 years, which is what REST is for. They're trying to build an API that lasts as long as their 3-month startup runway. They're trying to build it right now, and they'll build another one tomorrow, and it's fine. Yeah, it is a good idea, but it's slower. If you want to make multiple requests, you have to like wait for the response from the first one to find out if you can go and do the second thing. And people often skip it. If you can, then you should definitely use hypermedia. If you can't, then don't worry about it too much. Yeah, so the theft problem's a tricky one, because obviously if it's on a public API and people can navigate through and find your data, then that's one thing. You can rate limit requests so that you can find out if you've got like 1 million records or like 10,000 records and you notice that people are going through just getting all of them, then you can either you can either limit them, which will slow them down. It's not really a perfect solution. Or you can make sure that you're really the data that you want to keep secure isn't on a pageable list, right? So with the art spotter data, they wouldn't have a list called /arts where you could go through and save all the art. That's not hypermedia. That's just paginating, right? So they'd have a thing where if I'm in this area, then it would show me these things. And if you had someone if you noticed someone making requests, which is, I'm here now, 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 then you could get in touch with them because they've got API credentials and you know what their email address is for their app, and be like, hey, what the hell are you doing with my data? It's not a perfect solution. It's hard to limit public data, but you can find ways. Anybody else? It's normally the point where I say time for me to go to the pub, but I don't think they have them in Utah. So thank you for your time, everyone.
Go to Salt Lake for that.
Nice.